Castology.
This is Castology, and I am Zane C. Weber, your first and foremost castologist for today, for it is the Zanecast minisode. But I am here with my other podcast friends, my podcast chums, my castologinos across the table.
Nick Bleeker.
And joining us over the interwebs,
Liz Best, still sore throaty.
we aim to be back in studio for the next episode, so don't get too addicted to Liz's sultry tones because
I know I can only sound like this for so long. Please.
But this is one of our minisodes, patent pending, and it is my minisode again this week. And I've decided to make good on a lot of promises that I've made over the course of this podcast and recommend my top 5 listener recommendations that have yet to be recommended on the podcast.
Oh, so I'm getting up and take notes then.
Yeah, these are new podcasts that no one's recommended on the podcast yet. So
down.
and when I will own up that a couple of weeks ago I took a mental health day and pushed recording back a week, which is why we're recording now. And doing that made me feel incredibly guilty. So I went through into the listener recommendation list and double checked everything. And I listened to all the new submissions. So I'm just on air. I'm letting my fellow castologists know that the list is updated and there is a lot of new good stuff in there if you want to go have a listen.
Can confirm.
I just say, though, you don't need to feel guilty for taking a mental health day. And I'm very glad that you've done this extra listener submissions for us. But also you didn't need to feel indebted because everyone is allowed to have a mental health day where you just burrito the day away.
Everyone's allowed to have a mental health day but me. Yeah. No, I 100% agree with that for other people, but my brain does not let me have that luxury myself. So, without any further ado, in no particular order, this is not in the chronological order that they were submitted. These are literally just the ones that I didn't think someone else would pick up and put into the podcast, but I thought interesting and deserved a mention anyway. So starting off with the Smashing Security podcast, recommended by Carol T. Now, Carol T is one of the hosts. It's 2 hosts. They do have guests. It's a little informal. It's kind of a weekly recap on what's going on in the world of tech and cybersecurity and the mistakes that are being made and like attacks that happened and really interesting kind of industry-esque podcast, but it is approachable to a layperson as well.
I'm interested.
Yeah, so it's hosted by Graham Cluley, I think is how you pronounce his last name, and Carol Therault, I want to say. And they both work in the industry, the computer security industry. So yeah, that's kind of what it is. They've had guests like Gary Kasparov and Mikko Hepponen. Now, those are the 2 names that I recognized. They listed a few more in their description. But yeah, the Smashing Security podcast.
I am also surprisingly interested in that.
that is interesting. It is chatty and approachable, so it is kind of informal chat between 2 friends, so that is kind of a Liz style.
But also I like hearing about security dumb mistakes that people are making that mean that we're going to get taken over.
Absolutely. So this next one I'm including because I could not imagine another episode in which I would recommend this podcast. It's called No Experts Allowed, and it was recommended by Seth Roseman, who again is one of the hosts. And so it is Jonathan Fuller and Seth Roseman, and they're talking about Bible stories, informally, just educationally, talking about Bible stories and like what the fundamental question of the story is and what you learned. And they kind of examine it. It is a very, I want to say, what is the word? Protestant approach to Christianity.
What is a Protestant approach to Christianity?
Not a Catholic.
Okay.
Yeah. So that could be Anglican. That could be Presbyterian. That could be,
okay.
Yeah. Basically, it's defined by what it is not. And it is a very approachable podcast. The content, of course, doesn't get me. I kind of recoil a little bit when religion gets brought up, but it was
This
interesting.
is pretty surprising.
The way that they talk about it is very approachable, and I think if you are a Christian or a lapsed Christian, this could be a very interesting podcast. So that's No Experts Allowed, educational, informal chatting about Bible stories and what they mean and what they could mean and how different people have interpreted them. The next one is by friend of the podcast, Mark Spencer, and he recommended Artbreaker. Now, Artbreaker is part of the Climactic podcast network. Now, so Climactic is a podcast network specifically about podcasts that deal with the climate crisis. And Artbreaker is an exploration of what art in society means for the climate crisis and how art is affected, how art can change. So it talks about like the materials that are used, how we present the climate crisis through art. It is interview style. It is informal, and it is currently on hiatus. I believe they haven't released for a few months, but it is a podcast that never had a regular release schedule. They just, when they have an interview to release, they will release it.
That artwork is incredible.
Yeah, it's a fun podcast.
Holy shit!
So that is, and I highly recommend you check out the Climactic, Climactic Network's suite of shows. There's a lot of great stuff on there.
Climactic Collective.
Yes, yeah, and that's www.climactic.fm. Artbreaker, about art in the Anthropocene, or the age of men. Gross.
Oh, that podcast art is phenomenal. Oh my God.
So when we recommended, I believe Liz recommended Wooden Overcoats.
I did.
David Barnes of Wooden Overcoats got in contact with us and said, "Hey, thanks for shouting us out. Here's a bunch of other podcasts that the cast are involved in," and so I've picked one of them. There are still others available.
Such a fangirl that whenever we get people like commenting or messaging us back going, "Thanks for messaging us," I'm like, oh my God, they're talking to me.
Yeah.
I knew you before you knew my name. So I picked one of them. So the others are still in there if you want to go have a listen and recommend. So I'm recommending Crowley Time with me, Tom Crowley, which was recommended by David Barnes of Wooden Overcoats. This is a sketch comedy podcast. It's very British, very Amelia
Project.
The Amelia Project. Yeah, sorry, I blanked on the title there. And it's basically
adding it to my list right now. On my phone.
I can see it.
So it's just comedy sketches and characters and messages and bottles that are basically written and performed by Tom Crowley and various other of his comedic cohorts.
That makes me giggle. It's like shouting.
So I highly recommend. Very, very British comedy. If you're into that sort of thing, you will like it. I will say the one thing to note is that there's no consistent episode length. Some of them are like 7 minutes, some of them are like an hour. I think it really is kind of a comedy notebook for Tom Crowley. So it is very interesting to see how that kind of works and is put together. Finally, I'm recommending The Industry, which was recommended by Dan Delgado. So The Industry is a podcast that kind of takes a look at some of the lesser known, forgotten stories of like movie history. So it is stories from inside the movie industry, particularly like scandalous lawsuits and movies that were like made against the odds and that sort of thing. We get a lot of movie podcast recommendations because there's a lot of movie podcasts out there. I picked this one because it's scripted, it's very professional sounded, one host, 30 to 60 minutes, and it's a history podcast, and that's my thing.
Straight up.
It's just called The Industry by Dan Delgado. Definitely give it a listen, and that's my top 5 listener recommendations that have yet to be recommended on the podcast.
So I'm just trying to look up The Industry on Apple Podcasts and it's not coming up.
It's like the industry. It's like in headlight.
It's like on a marquee of
marquee,
of a theater presented by Movie Maker. It's got a little red thing down the bottom. I will send you the link, and the link will be in the show notes.
Post it because I'm having trouble searching on Apple Podcasts. Maybe that's my problem, but yeah.
Also, the industry is a very generic name. So,
does this mean
it hasn't even brought up a single podcast called The Industry? Like,
it is. It's listed in TV and film, and it has 4.8 star rating of 55 ratings.
Speaking of ratings, rate and subscribe to us.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's been a while since we've got a couple of new ratings. It'd be nice if a couple of people, if you're new to us, it'd be great to hear your reviews. And we might read some of them out on air if they're 5 stars.
Apple Podcasts is the rating and review venue of choice, but Podchaser is also good. We have, at time of recording in the last couple of weeks, got a couple on Podchaser, which have been just like, hey, this is a great place to find new podcasts. That's what we're here for. Particularly because I always feel for the smaller podcasts who don't get as much airtime as the bigger dudes and dudettes, I guess, and dudinos. I don't know. Everyone, the smaller podcasts need some love. So if you have a podcast that you would like us to listen to and maybe recommend, go to our website, that's notcanon.com/castology, and fill out the form, or just reach out on social media, or give us a 5-star review and just, like, hey, listen to this podcast, because reciprocity. And that's it.
If I select one of your shows from this list,
yeah,
will I get into trouble?
Probably not, because I like them. So
okay, cool.
Liz might get in trouble because you might feel that you're cheating.
No,
like, because then we actually get to review it and talk about it.
Absolutely.
These are just like Cliff's Notes listy list episodes. This is like the main episode is like the feature article of this listicle episode.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the thing. Like, I didn't mind that you recommended Dissect.
Hell yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, give us a rating and a review. We'll be back next week with another full episode with some reviews and recommendations. Until then, I've been your castologist, Zane C. Weber, here with
Nick Bleeker
and
Liz Best. Hopefully in studio next week.
Hopefully in studio next week. Listen to podcasts, everyone, or else.
Hi, I'm Fearful Jesuit. Well, that's my pseudonym at least. I keep my identity secret because I'm the host of a show called The Paranoid Strain, which takes a skeptical view of conspiracy theories. And some conspiracy theory fans are a tad touchy about that subject. My show is designed to help make sense of the insane ideas that seem to pop up constantly these days. Where do they come from? Why do people believe them? And how does their belief impact the rest of us? I'm inviting you to check out a very special episode we recently launched. It's a concept album about living through the year 2020 in a very conspiracy-addled United States of America, featuring a full voice cast and dozens of original songs by our show's dedicated band, the Paranoid Strain Orchestra. It's called 9116, and it's available now in all of your favorite podcast apps. Just look up The Paranoid Strain and click on the logo with the terrified eyeball.